Uh, Today I have Jasper Schouten with me. Jasper has had an adventurous career in the food and ingredients industry. Jasper is CEO and co-founder of 1-2-Taste, which is a digital marketplace for food, ingredients, and services. After completing a master's degree at Wageningen University in the Netherlands, Jasper started working for global food ingredients companies. And in that role, he's been to many different countries and worked there, including Egypt, China, Dubai, and he's got a real appreciation for regional commercial challenges, which is part of what he's tackling at 1-2-Taste. Jasper is passionate about revolutionizing the B2B food industry through his platform and through building smart connections across the ingredient industry. And we are going to learn more about 1-2-Taste. That's a nice intro, Jasper, but I think there's probably more behind it. So why don't you tell us a little bit about 1-2-Taste and what you do and why you think it's important and your journey so far. A couple minutes, elevator pitch or update.
Elevator pitch.
Yeah.
I recently practiced one for 1 minute.
Okay. Yeah, I'll give you more time than that. How's that?
Yeah. So 1-2-Taste is a B2B platform operating in the food ingredient space, and the food ingredient space is seen globally at around $750 billion as a size of market. It's a gigantic size of market, but it's also a very traditional market, right? So the standard sales process is still to have projects, to visit customers with samples, and then work on improving those. This obviously is a very traditional way of working. Out of that total amount of market, 50% of that market are small and medium-sized enterprises. And those are typically served today through distributors that are typically overcharging, underperforming, and are having a limited amount of ingredients available. Mm-hmm. So what we do as 1-2-Taste, we want to enable the small and medium-sized enterprises and make them as competitive and as innovative as the global leaders in the market. We started the company in 2020 in India and opened up shop in October 2020 in Europe. And we have been shown quite steep growth so far. We have over 1,400 customers, more than 2,000 ingredients online, and we have over 60,000 visitors on the platform today.
Wow, that's actually grown a lot since even I've known you in this year and a half or so. And are you doing the distribution and shipping of those, or is that handled by the supplier directly?
Yeah, so we do we have different models. As you can imagine, also Amazon has different models. So we have a model that we do drop shipping. So we take the goods from the supplier's warehouse and we drop it to the customers. We have a warehouse also in Europe and in India where our suppliers can have their stocks and we supply directly from the warehouse. Mm-hmm. And typically for samples, which we also foster that shipment, we try to keep all of them in our warehouse.
Okay, great. And why? I've always wondered why India. Like you would think that an opportunity like this would exist in large form in the Western markets like Europe and the US. Is India specifically a great place to start an online ingredient business like this? And what about that makes it unique?
Yeah, well, obviously we thought so. Well, India, first of all, is obviously a gigantic market by itself.
But it's a low cost market, right? Like it's very cost sensitive, isn't it?
Yeah, well, price in general is something that is super important in the food ingredients industry. And you need to have the right product at the right time, at the right price in front of the customers, which is something that we continuously live by. But if you look at why we chose India, is because we knew that the Indian market for distribution is substantial, and we believe that we can disrupt that market by going directly from the suppliers to the small and medium-sized enterprises. So that's why we chose India, but actually what you see in Europe is a similar thing. Only value is much faster, much bigger in Europe.
Our margins probably also a little bit bigger in the Western countries, I would imagine. Or...
Well, we try to keep a similar margin levels because we, as I mentioned, our purpose is to drive also competitiveness for our customers. So we try to give them the advantage of the market in that sense.
Okay, great. Maybe we can talk a little bit about the ingredient business. I mean, as you know, like I've not been in the food business very long. I'm coming out of a technology background myself, and it was really the ingredient industry that made me interested in doing something within food, because I was fascinated by how concentrated it is. Like, as you mentioned, 50% of that big market is small and medium enterprises, which means that the other 50% is large enterprises, right? Which is a pretty... And I don't know if many people know this, but it's really dominated by like a handful of players in the different areas. If you look at like starches or flavors or fats and oils and things like this, which obviously probably has a lot to do with the scale efficiencies that they can have. But also, I think you're just seeing kind of like acquisition happen all over the place. Like, you know, like DSM just bought Firmenation. At some level, you get to the size of being a big company, and the only place that you can really grow your business meaningfully as a CFO or a CEO is oftentimes through acquisition rather than through core innovation. Like, because, you know, innovation typically starts with a very small idea, and then you sell a very small amount of it, and then you have to sort of make these long-term bets about how big the market can grow. Do you see that there is opportunity for small and medium enterprises to prosper in that environment where like maybe the big players just don't care as much about the newer opportunities or the niche markets that are out there? Because it can't move
obviously
the needle,
I see opportunities for SME ingredient producers, right? And for multiple reasons. Is because the amount of ingredients is actually growing in the market. So in the past you'd have starch, you'd oils and fats and those kind of things, but right now you have proteins and many different types of proteins, you have many different types of starches, etc. So the amount of ingredients are actually growing, and the agility of the larger players is actually much less. So that's why they have to have that acquisition model into their system, because else they will lose track. So the pure commodity market, as a total volume, is apparently a little bit shrinking because they lose space to other ingredients that are replacing them for a part. And I think that's where SMEs can play a vital role in coming up with very high quality ingredients, and that can take that space.
Okay. Interesting. Now, I think that one of the big things that's been obviously on the minds of everybody, particularly in Europe, is the impact of first of all, the war that started in Europe this year that impacted one of the biggest producers of core food inputs for the world and also for Europe. But also then I think, you know, we've had a lot of difficult weather over the course of the past couple of months, right? So we've seen this in our customers as well, doing a lot of reformulation work because they just simply can't get particular ingredients, or they're starting to make statements where they're going to start raising price, and obviously that's going to be passed on through to the end consumer. And if you think about it, many of the brands that we are familiar with that make the products that we buy in the store, they're really just brands, right? Like the actual food stuff that comes from that is coming from the supplier in the B2B industry. So can you talk a little bit about what you think challenges might be coming up in the next, I think it's not just the next year, but you're talking about like the next 10 years as we adapt, to things like climate change and other things like this.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, I went on my summer leave, and I decided to switch off my telephone for the news, because actually the news can be really dragging you down. At least I find that sometimes. It's always in your face, the climate change, the war. But I would like to bring it in a more positive note. I think that the independence on energy could, or our dependency on energy could also help us to boost the sustainable energy. So I truly hope that the different governments will put money into that. I know that the Dutch government is putting actually a lot of money into this transition. But if you would look at that on the short run, you see, I read a report yesterday that the energy prices for the brewers in the UK are going through the roof, at least doubling on a monthly basis. This morning, I saw an ad on LinkedIn that the Dutch bakery industry was ringing the alarm bells on the energy bills. So one way or another way, we the consumer will have to pay more for the food that we buy today. But that also, I'm also a great believer that actually a shortage of something will make people more creative than an abundance of something, right? We've been living in an abundance of money for the whole protein transition.
Yeah.
But I don't believe that we actually really cracked it yet. But if there would be very little and we would have to do it, I think the creativity will be much higher.
Right. Yeah, I think that we could go on about that part of the discussion, is that, like, should that money have been injected into that particular portion of the food ecosystem? I mean, I think that if investors are willing to invest, that's great. And investor money is typically not the money of the man on the street. I mean, to some degree, that's pensions and things like that. But I think that it's a good thing that investors invest. Maybe they overinvest, maybe they lose some money, but I think it gives some
the signal is clear, right?
Yeah, some capital to play with. It gives entrepreneurs the chance to maybe try things that they hadn't tried otherwise. What do you think about, though, innovation that might happen in the types of ingredients or even the types of inputs? I was reading something recently about a type of grain that it's like the oldest cultivated grain in Africa, which is not really even very well known anymore because, people just—
Are you talking about teff?
It may be it, but I forget the name of it. I think you're correct about that. It basically thrives in like drought conditions, right? It's still expensive to get. I actually looked at getting some of it in Switzerland here. Like I did look, but it was pricey. But yeah, I think so much of the food ecosystem has to do with like what is established, and then you have big companies that are set up to make money by doing a certain thing, and to change that certain thing is inconvenient for them. And you're right. Perhaps it takes like a huge exogenous shock to start some of those trends or some of those exploration of things that could help in the long run, right? So.
Yeah. No, so we have teff on the Want to Taste platform, and actually it's selling. So it is a very interesting grain because it's much smaller than the normal grains, and it doesn't exhaust the soil, and it doesn't use as much water as normal grain does. So it is indeed a good. And it's a non-allergen as well, so there's some real benefits to that ingredient. But as a whole, I think we are looking always at improving the recipes in terms of cost efficiency. And health, obviously, and then sustainability is becoming an important part of that as well. So if you look at what we see happening is that there is interest in sustainable ingredients as long as they are well priced, because price is still a leading factor in any industry, I would guess, but definitely also in the food ingredients industry. But if you can manage to get a good price and a sustainable aspect to it, then people prefer to use it to other ingredients.
Food producers prefer to use it, which means then consumers will buy it because they only buy. I mean, at the end of the day, consumers only buy what producers produce. So like the producers reacting to the consumer, but the producer still does have a
Yeah.
choice in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this is actually kind of interesting because, the food ecosystem changes really slowly in terms of people's preferences. Like there's so much emotion and culture that's tied up in this. So in order to get people to change, it's kind of it's like an illogical behavior, right? It's a lot based in habit and, in culture and emotion. But if you think about things like this debate that's going on around, the protein debate, I see this all the time on social media. People saying, well, we should eat plant-based proteins and not have meat. Well, we could also just eat less meat. I mean, that's also an option. Probably a combination of the two would be great. I mean, do you think that there is a space for regulation in some of this? Like, has anyone said, well, they regulate sugar, for example, in the United States? Like if you go into like a Starbucks or something these days, I don't go back to the US that often, but when you go in there, like you see like the number of calories and the sugar. And I think that they even put a sugar tax on in New York City where they, and there's like certain super sizes of these like sugary drinks that you can't even sell. It's illegal. I'm generally not a fan of regulation, but if it is really true that we don't need to, as a society, eat so much protein, because we don't. I mean, if you look at the protein consumption per person, particularly in the States and the Western world, it's obviously way higher than it was 50 years ago. And like people are no less or more healthy. They're probably less healthy as a result of it. Now, do you think that there's a space there for regulation? I mean, we tax carbon, we tax gasoline, we tax cigarettes.
Well,
I mean,
I think the UK already has it.
Do you think there's some sort of logic in doing that? Right.
I think the UK already has a sugar tax.
Not just a sugar tax. What about a protein tax? Right.
Protein tax.
Yeah.
Oh, that's an interesting one. Well, then I think you will come into a discussion what type of proteins, right? Would you be taxing? One of the things that you mentioned about this transition, right? So on the 13th of October, we are holding a event on the protein transition in the Netherlands for the industry that is active in that field. And we have a very interesting speaker called Roland Dietvors, who is a neuroscientist that actually speaks about this transition. And as much as we want, and as much as we would love to change it, we're still animals, right? So we behave also like animals. And he's got a fantastic story about that. So I'm much more in favor, and I think we share that opinion, to have a very good vegan dish. So if you go to India, you can have the most amazing food, in my eyes, that is vegan, and you literally don't miss anything out on meat. So it's also that you fulfill a certain taste or enjoyment in the dinner.
Yeah, I think there's a sense of satiety, right? And even you can look at a lot of like protein sources, like poor value protein or poor quality doesn't actually make you feel like you've satisfied yourself. And you're right, like we're animals, and what do animals do? They instinctively eat what keeps them alive and keeps them optimized, right? And human beings never ate a lot of meat historically. It's only been very, very recently that we've increased the consumption of meat so much. And I actually have the opinion that the plant-based industry tries to leverage this, like this addiction that people have to eating meat or meat products. And they're like, well, great, we'll replace that with the plant-based product, and then we'll sell more of the plant-based product. I don't know if that's really being genuine towards the goal of just reducing, emissions and output. I agree with you. Is like, if you could just make a nice meal with vegetables, this would also be better if you could satisfy your nutritional needs, right?
Yeah, that would have my preference, but obviously a whole lot of people have a different opinion on
that. But this is, I mean, also a whole lot of people, were addicted to smoking cigarettes in the 1980s, and the United States got rid of that because they realized it was addictive and bad for health, and they just made a sociological decision to do that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, could
well,
something like this be
let's make
future?
Great food that is without a link to meat.
I guess, but maybe. It could be, I'm not saying I'm in favor of this, but I mean, it could be just beyond the realm of human discipline to do that. And it could really require something that's more drastic if these if all of the sources of greenhouse gases and all the rest of these points are true, then it leads you to the logical conclusion that one has no choice but to start to limit these productions, right? That's it. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it reminds me always of the story of Who Moved My Cheese. I'm sure that
I don't know the story at
it's
all.
a basic management book
No,
that everybody.
what do you mean? It sounds like a Dutch thing. Who moved my cheese?
No,
I've never
I
heard
don't
of
think
it.
it's a story about two mice in a labyrinth,
Yeah.
and two small people in a labyrinth.
Okay.
And they get stuck in a room where there's a lot of cheese, but the mice keep looking for the next cheese, but the people just keep sitting there, because there's cheese there. And at some point the cheese runs out, and the mice already found another a stock of cheese, but the humans, they are just sitting. Yeah, it came from somewhere, so it will probably come again, right?
Right.
And they just wait. And that's basically what we're doing. We're waiting. We're driving 180 miles an hour, and we know there's a wall right in front of us, right?
Yeah.
But we ignore the wall because we didn't experience it.
Well, it's inconvenient to recognize that, right? I think, you know. Yeah.
But I find that a very painful thought.
Yeah, I think it's, again, like, I think fundamental lack of long-term discipline, which I think is also a human trait, right? I mean, yeah. Anyhow, so what else do you think is kind of challenging to your industry, that specifically the ingredient industry? Like, obviously you're trying to take advantage of some trends where smaller players can be more prosperous, where they can leverage digital, which is not something, to be truthful, that we see lots of the big players doing that quickly. They're doing it, but not nearly as quickly as you can. But what are some of the other challenges that you think will come up as you continue to grow your business?
I think we have a lot of opportunities still. I mean, if you look at the healthy ingredients, and the health, which is also a macro trend in my eyes, is that people want to add something to the product that they already have, right? And I really like that. And a simple example is that you not have just Earl Grey or black tea and green tea, but you have also energizing tea, relaxing teas, and those kind of things. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity in that space. And if you look at technology as a whole, I think the industry has really proven to improve their technology in terms of ways to detect food safety issues and those kind of things. So we are much more able to identify small residues of a chemical, which brings obviously safer food. But I think that the next level really is to have real-time quality, so that you at any moment, at any time of the day, you can look at the supplier and you can tell whether his factory is running according to the standards of the industry. And I believe that would be definitely a next step. And also One to Taste is working with one of its partners to see how we can actually build that into the platform and into the supply chain of the platform.
And how does that type of technology work when you say operating according to the industry standards? I mean, there has to be some sort of on-site sensor or oversight or KPI that's coming out.
So there's multiple ways to go over that, but first of all, it's about, okay, are the rounds done in the morning through the factory? What are the abnormalities that they found in quality control? And that is all done in an ERP system, so you can directly subtract that on any time and report on that. And I think if you would do it like that, you need to be careful because mistakes are being made in the food industry every day, right? So when somebody has one day a little bit a poorer score, it doesn't mean that he's bad, right? But it means that that he has to do a corrective action, and you need to look at the more general trend. But it is important to bring that transparency to the customers to say, okay, this is how we control the entire supply chain.
And how do you enforce the authenticity of that transparency? I mean, one thing is having a third party, but the other thing, I mean, I would think that there's probably ways of manipulating some of that information should one want to, because I mean, it probably comes down to price, right? Like, you know, you're not as careful doing some of those checks because you don't have as much staff, because you're trying to make more margin and all the rest of this kind of thing, right? So
yeah, and that's where data needs to help you, right? And we're not there, right? But if you know that the average industry makes 6,000 batches a year, then you need to have at least 18,000 records of different parameters that they need to. So you can build in some kind of controls in there that would.
And I suppose a company in your position would be able to amass that would be anonymized common data that where you could detect potential abnormalities. And yeah, I suppose the common wisdom of the crowd enforces this, is that if I'm buying an ingredient and I see that there's an abnormality against these KPIs, I don't know necessarily the reason, but perhaps I can ask that supplier to explain them. And if they're unwilling to do that, well, then I can also choose to take my business elsewhere, which encourages the supplier to, you know, basically provide transparent information with proof.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, one of the major things in the food industry and food ingredients industry in particular is trust, right? And how do you digitize trust? So this could be definitely one benefit where you as a supplier, I mean, I hope every ingredient supplier is proud of their product and doing everything they can to deliver a high quality ingredient. So if you're open and willing to share that, that builds trust.
Right. Are there any brands that have tried to or thought about exposing their supply chain? Because like when you look at the ingredient list on a typical product that you buy in the store, it has ingredients, but it doesn't have suppliers on there, does it?
No, so typically they don't do that. It's still a very much a black box, and we're trying to open that black box, right? We're trying to make the pricing more transparent. Obviously, when you go to really large quantities, there will be some negotiations taking place on pricing, but in principle, we really want to bring that transparency in the supply chain. And once the industry would embrace that, the opportunities after that are really tremendous.
Yeah. How does that compare to something like for example, like fair trade has accomplished? I mean, I would presume that then if you buy something that has some of these branded labels on it, you should be able to trust that there's a certain principle of supply chain adhered to. But there's actually no way really to audit this, right? For the consumer.
Look, I would love to go beyond any of that, right?
Yeah.
I take out all the certification and just have a real-time quality in place, right? And you know, all these instances that give you a certificate, it's all costing money, which is in the end going to the final consumer that have to pay for that.
Right. Whereas when you go just like, you know, whenever, I mean, I go to Italy a lot, as you know, it's like you just walk into like anyone's backyard and you've got all of these things growing, right? Like, and it's like, well, you know exactly where it comes from, kind of thing, which is, I think it's really tremendous. And it's too bad that more of the supply chain is not like that. But I think that there are reasons why, like efficiency reasons, right? Like even things like locally produced products, you would think that they have a less carbon footprint, but in many cases they have a greater carbon footprint than the biggest brands because they don't have scale, right?
Yeah.
But, so.
Yeah. So you need to you need to look at it in detail. And I am also not saying that carbon footprint is the only measurement that should be taken into consideration. But if you look at sustainability, I also see very nice things happening right in side streams. So there's a company called Agro Singularity that is taking waste streams and for example, for paprika or other vegetables and making them into really high quality ingredients. There's a company in the Netherlands called the Peel Pioneers that take the peels of pressed oranges, and after that, in the peel obviously is still the oil, and they press out the oils, and they take the fibers, and they make great products out of that.
Yeah. And scaling that kind of thing, I've always wondered about this. It's tough because you have a small amount of supply in many different geographically disparate areas, right? But
the worst thing that could happen is that they press the oranges, throw away the orange juice, and start getting the oil, right?
Because the oil's worth more.
Then the side stream is becoming.
Yeah, I suppose. No, but I think like, yeah, this principle of like using the entire product is something that the supply chain is just not set up to do, right? Like it's set up to optimize a couple things, and then everything else on the sides is not used. I think the brewing industry is a good example of this. Like you have all of this byproducts of the brewing process of brewing beer that could be made into bread and different grains and actually eaten, but it's tough to do at scale, right? Because you have to move a lot of that material, and it's not really worth much versus its volume. Right. So
but you have this other initiative on Starbucks where they collect all the remains of the coffee, right? And then I think they still press the oil out of that, but they have a van driving it, electric van probably driving around collecting all these.
Yeah, well, certainly, not having energy and transportation costs have such a huge impact on all of these ideas. When you have to use fossil fuels to move products from A to point B, it just doesn't really work that well, right?
Yeah.
So I think that many of these things will become more possible when other technologies also enable them, right? Well, so I mean, when you're trying to digitize the sale of ingredients, but is there some area where you think there's a large amount of innovation possibility, even commercial opportunity for you or for the ingredient industry that is going to open up in the coming years? Or do you see it more as kind of a battle of enabling the little guys to fight against the big guys that are becoming bigger and bigger as time goes on? Because those big ones, I think, continue to get more and more power, mostly from their balance sheet than anything else, right? So
I don't really know how that will develop, but what I do know is that the amount of innovation in the market by smaller and medium-sized companies is not slowing down, and I think there will always be new innovative companies that will stand up against the bigger ones, and the problem is once a bigger one buys a smaller one, it gets absorbed into their corporate structure, and then the fun or the attracting part in a way disappears as well, because then it becomes all of a sudden it has to be super scalable, low cost, and
well, maybe there's a place for that, though. I mean, I think that having that kind of I think that there's a place for acquisition, well-placed acquisition. I mean, the investment cycle needs to work, otherwise it will stop completely. Do you see more small and medium-sized innovative ingredient providers starting business? Like when you look at the number that are out there that could potentially be on your platform, do you think that that's going up on like a per $1 billion basis or something like that?
Well, for sure, there's a lot of innovative new companies that are looking into that whole sustainable part, right? And I think that also Wageningen University and Food Valley in the Netherlands are fostering a lot of these initiatives. So I think it's. I don't have the numbers, right? But my gut feel tells me that there is an increase in the number of these companies. and that also trends are moving faster than before. In the past you could have an innovative product that would last for 3 years or 5 years, I don't know, but I think that the turnover is much quicker than it used to be.
You mean things go out of style, quote unquote, or they're just more things to choose from, which would imply that it's actually more competitive if you're a small ingredient provider, because sooner or later you're displaced before you can even get up and running with a core product.
Yeah, it would mean that, for example, last year we saw the hard seltzers being very popular. I didn't see much of that this year. So I mean, you see this wave of new products, and they appear and they disappear. Whether that makes the opportunity bigger, or whether that makes the competitive landscape larger, I wouldn't know.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I mean, anything else you want to share about, your business, what you're doing, what to expect next? Yeah.
Well, obviously, I would like that everybody buys on the One Two Taste platform.
Well, actually, to that point, what kind of volumes could you manage? Like, if somebody came to you from a big producer and said, hey, look, we want to start transacting all of the, or large parts of the business that we currently do with these distributors, which I agree with you, like any sort of middleman sitting in an office building someplace is probably not nearly as efficient as a digital platform. Would you be able to manage those types of volumes?
We do actually already.
Okay.
So from not all volumes are online, but we do move containers up and down. So we can manage those kind of requests as well. And actually we see an increased number of people that are actually coming in with a request. So typically you have two types of visitors. You have a hunter that is looking for a good price, and you have an innovator that is looking to innovate his current product, or has to produce a new product. And both are interesting for us in that sense. So if you look at One Two Taste, I think we have been showing the growth that really justifies that there's a place for a marketplace like One Two Taste. And for us, it's a lot in scaling now, and in growing our portfolios, and in growing our customer base.
Yeah. And what about the network effect? So if I'm I'm a small producer or medium-sized producer, say I have different product categories, and I decide to try out One Two Taste with a bit of my supply chain, I get some innovative ingredients, and then I say, well, actually, it'd be, what are the benefits for me just putting more on that platform? And then how does that help others that are on the platform? Are you trading data, like anonymized data that helps them make decisions, or, versus going through like traditional means where they might be able to negotiate bulk prices more easily? Like, what are the benefits to doing it all in one place, right?
Yeah, well, and the network is something that we do find very important, right? So a lot of our suppliers are also our customers. And if you look at what we're really trying to do is to go out more like that. So that's why we're also organizing this protein event, and we call it One Two Taste, where food people meet. And it's a drink, one great speech, and then it's gone again, right? And it's something where we really want to build that community. If you talk about data, anonymous data, and making some sense out of that, we're just getting into the space where we have enough data to start looking into those kind of things. And recently we did a small post around that, where we see a certain type of ingredient Spiking, and that just to give an alert. So it's getting there, and obviously when you're on the platform, there's benefits, because then we can give these insights much more detailed, and give some value to being on the site, next to having a window and a sales channel that you don't have currently.
Yeah, I would imagine that's a huge amount of long-term value. I mean, if you look at well, I think Amazon's a great example, but mostly that's about distribution, but also information. But if you look at other cases where, you have a lot more suppliers that come into the market, like Etsy, for example, it's maybe not even one-to-one because it's more B2C products, but many of these companies are facilitated by having this channel, which they never would have had access to before. They would have had to go find a distributor and convince them to do that, and then you pay all that money to do that. But when you can start at very small scale, then the community in and of itself becomes a real value, because you can watch innovation. If you're larger, you can see those people. I would imagine that is ultimately creates most of your enterprise value, rather than just the
long-term
fees,
probably.
right? Yeah. So that's cool. And what about competitors in the market? Are you seeing others trying to do something similar, like online versions of ingredient businesses? When I first met you, I think I could only count one other that was trying to do something similar, but I don't think they've really gotten there.
Yeah, I think there in the meantime there are some others. None of them are doing exactly what we do. So I still think that we're uniquely positioned. But speed for us is essential, obviously.
Yeah, grabbing market share, right? All right, well, listen, it's great to learn more and catch up, see your progress, see how things are going, and learn a little bit about the food ingredient industry. Let us know if we can help at all. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to get over to the Netherlands anytime soon, but I'm going to go the other direction. But I'm going to Israel in November, actually. I'm totally looking forward to this. Yeah, there's a food event down there. I'm not sure how large it is, but people have talked about it. But I'm just more interested in going there and checking out the ecosystem.
Well, it's definitely a booming industry there for startups. There's a lot of energy there. Is what I see. I'm quantitative. I don't know if I can judge it that well, but at least there's a lot of noise there.
Yeah, like I think a lot of tech ingredients, right? Like I think that ecosystem goes like hardcore tech pretty well, right?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, nice to talk to you. Thanks for taking the time, and we'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Okay. Thanks very much for having this chat.
Absolutely. Take care. Cheers.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.